All right, good morning, wonderful day to you. Welcome to the agenda on Dominion Broadcast Group, where we delve into the polity of the Nigerian state as it concerns you. I am Chike Obogo. On the agenda today, we take a critical look at where Nigeria stands, examining the challenges, opportunities, and defining issues shaping our nation's future. From economic struggles and security concerns to political developments and social transformation, Nigeria stands at a crossroad. The resilience of its people remains unshaken, yet pressing questions linger. Are we moving forward, or are we stuck in cycles of unfulfilled potential? As we delve into this discussion, we will assess key sectors: governance, infrastructure, education, and youth empowerment, just to gauge the pulse of the nation. With rising unemployment, inflation, and regional instability, Nigerians are demanding accountability and tangible progress. Yet, amid these trials, there are stories of innovation, cultural vibrancy, and unwavering hope. Join us as we explore the realities, confront the hard truths, and envision a path towards a stronger, more united Nigeria. To do this with me this morning is a professor of law and presently the Vice Chancellor, Protestant University, Rwanda, Professor Olu Ojedokun. Professor Olu Ojedokun, good to have you here. And good morning. It's good to sit with the Vice Chancellor.
Well, top of the day to you. And of course, I'm privileged to be in your presence because you're not only instrumental to bringing me here, you're very much instrumental to my, blowing up on the radio. So, yes, so much appreciation. Yes.
Thank you, Prof. I'm honored once again. And, well, your simplicity is what I admire a lot. And I think I've told you before, I learned so many, so many words from you. Yeah, and it's always good to have you. So how has it been in Nigeria so far?
Well,
coming from Rwanda.
First and foremost, there's no place like home. So, of course, the dysfunctionality of the Nigerian society is something that attracts me rather than repels me.
Okay.
Of course, I'm concerned about it, but it brings certain unpredictability, unreliability, but that's consistent. But at the same time, there's life, there's joy. People find a way forward. And I think I miss that. In Rwanda, you have order, you have discipline, straitjacket, and sometimes when you have all that, the room for innovation and creativity is limited. So what you get in Nigeria out of the chaos is creativity, innovation. Doesn't mean we should persist and continue that way, but at least that's the good thing that comes out of Nigeria. So I do miss that about Nigeria.
Okay, so we'll go on this break. We'll be back in a bit. It's still the agenda on Dominion Broadcast Group. Welcome back from that short break. It's still the agenda on Dominion Broadcast Group. All right. Before we went on the agenda, we're trying to familiarize or compare Nigeria and Rwanda. And Prof here is telling us that Rwanda is law and order in Rwanda. So that brings me to the question. Is it that Nigeria is lawless?
Well, in some respects it is. Not every respect, but in some respect. And why do I say that? For instance, Rwanda is a society where you can't overspeed because there are speed cameras all over the place. It's a society where you can bribe the police. Why? Because two policemen operate in tandem without knowing each other. So they check on each other. It's a place where you can throw filth, rubbish, trash on the floor. Because if you do, you'll be picked up. You know, so there are a number of things and there are consequences. But you also have to remember that Rwanda is a very much smaller society.
Yeah.
And of course, the history of Rwanda, which has been traumatic and which they've tried to work to make progress in, it's 13.2 million. That's hardly the population of Lagos. So you may argue that the population helps. But again, you have the population of the US, the population of the UK, France, and yet they can make something of the society. So it's not just population, I dare say it's leadership also.
Leadership?
Yes.
How about the followers?
Well, the followers also matter, but if you have leadership that is attuned, then they can drag the followers along or inspire them, which is what we prefer. But currently today, you have to ask the question, do we have the right leadership? Does the leadership inspire? And is there any example that the followers have to look up to? So those are the kind of questions. In Rwanda, there's an example they have to look up to, as a followership. I have access to ministers in Rwanda already. I've only been there 4 or 5 months. I'm already advising ministers. I have access to them, you understand, because they work with ideas, not with personalities. If I was in Nigeria, I can guarantee you, irrespective of my intellect, irrespective of the innovation I bring to issues, I wouldn't have access to the governor. I wouldn't have access to minister. I wouldn't. I just simply wouldn't.
Even not to a commissioner?
Well, commissioners, I might have access not because of who I am, but because of the relationship we probably had in the past.
In the past. Okay.
Yes. So I think we need to move beyond that. And that is why when I gave my inaugural lecture on Tuesday, one of the things I wanted was that there should be a synergy, there should be much more of a conversation going on between town and gown. The senators, for instance, should be able to employ, you understand, research output, or input rather, from universities for whatever paper, whatever bills or laws they are making. We're not saying employ professors. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying use the intellectual capital that exists in a higher institution for the purpose of solving problems, rather than for the purpose of having theses you put on the used for coffee, coffee place holders or whatever, or the shelves.
But you see, when you say you want to, you're proposing a synergy between the town and the gown, and then you want to ask, what's the minimum qualification for you to becoming a public office holder in Nigeria, especially when it comes to the Senate? The minimum qualification is primary school leaving certificate, and then you still want to ask, how will someone of that caliber, of that intellectual space, we want to deal with a professor? Don't you think there will be some atom of low self-esteem?
Well, there might be some confidence issues, but let us remember, Lateef Kayode Jakonde was never a graduate, you understand? In fact, what he went through, of course, he went to secondary school, but what he went through was some professional training on the job. And there are a lot of politicians like that who necessarily didn't go, you understand, to university in the past, but on the job they were trained and they became well equipped. Or you may say that's in the past. But even if people come in at school certificate level or secondary school level at the minimum, you understand, I think that if there's a willingness to learn, you understand, they can move through. And you also have to understand that if they get ideas from intellectuals, the intellectuals are not the ones that get the praise. It is they, the senators.
They should be the
It is the House of Rep member, the members of the State House of Assembly that actually get the praise. So I think, yes, they might be a bit intimidated, but if intimidation is going to get them re-elected or is going to get their names in the book, you understand, I think many of them would not mind. But I think we need to look at the qualifications again to see, you understand, whether it should be upped, to at least the graduate level. After all, we have so many unemployed graduates.
But they'll tell you politics is local.
Yeah, it is local, so you must have the ability to connect. But it's beyond local, because from the local, you're in politics because you want to solve problems, because you want to make society better. And if you're in politics just for your own good, then it's for it doesn't benefit anybody.
Locals don't understand the big grammar, the intellectuals who speak. All they need to hear is Kilamaje, Kilamomu, that kind of thing.
But the locals also understand what is called sustainability. They don't want to be begging every day, unless they don't have self-respect. But the reason why they beg every day is because there's no capacity in the economy to employ them or to allow their businesses to thrive. And if they see a politician who's able to go beyond giving them, I don't know, what did they give them? Is it brooms they give them this day, or Okada? Okada is even good, you understand? You could use that for business. But that can give them something that sustains them beyond that political cycle into the future. I think many of them will go for it.
Well, you talked about brooms now, and then that brings me to the discussion of the umbrella being punctuated now, and then the broom being used even in the rainy season. What I mean is there's this defection from the PDP to the APC. And some commentators have said this might just be turning Nigeria into a one-party state. What are your thoughts on this? Are you in dissonance or you are in consonance with this assertion?
Well, I'm worried first and foremost, and my worry, is that in a society where you don't have a critical friend, where you don't have constructive criticism, where everybody belongs to the same church or the same mosque or the same denomination, then what you're going to have is a echo chamber, rather. In other words, you hear your own voices. When you write a book, you don't get people to review it, you just do it. There's a lot of ripple to it, a lot of mistakes, no matter how intelligent you are. And I fear that the defections are not based on principle, they're not based on policy disagreements, they're based on positioning of power, political positioning. Some might even suggest that they're based on primitive accumulation of wealth or to protect themselves from future prosecution. Some might suggest that. And I fear that if it's not checked, you understand, or if you don't have an alternative political party coming up to challenge the monolith called the APC, then we're likely, as you suggest, to have one party in power, and it's not going to help us, you understand. If we had one party in power, and we were making significant progress in Nigeria, then I don't think many people will care. I think the problem is that when you have one party in power and we're not making the progress that we ought to be making, then people are worried and they're bothered.
Let's talk about the economic challenges in Nigeria and the opportunities we have here. There's this issue of rising inflation and also unemployment and poverty rates. We should be worried at this time in 2025 where we have such thing bedeviling us as a people, rising inflation, and the NBS comes up with figures which are not in tandem with the reality on ground. And then we want to ask again, who is telling us the truth? Who is fixing the economy? What are we doing as a people? Is it just because we are more of a consuming people than a producing people that we have such issues of high inflation, unemployment, and poverty rates?
Well, I think we already know that the high inflation has its genesis in the previous administration, and that was the printing of Naira. They call it qualitative easing or that.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. There was too much Naira printed, and there was less productivity in the economy, so of course you are bound to have inflation. But also, we also know that the increase of petroleum, the removal of subsidy, you understand, swept through the economy, and of course brought it on with it its own inflationary pressures from that point of view. I think if you look at the government in itself, sometimes they're well-intentioned, but the delivery and the way that it comes across doesn't show that people don't think that they are. So I think part of the issue is that some of the policies, there's a time lag. Some of the policies people seek to frustrate it because Nigeria is a society predicated on people benefiting from people's disasters or misfortune. I say that because up till now, there are people who don't want the Dangote refinery to work. Because if it works, it exposes a lot of things, from that point of view. And there are people who prefer inflation because it exposes a lot of things. But let's say this, inflation exists everywhere, and inflation sometimes fuels economic growth. But when inflation, you understand, is running ahead of growth, you understand, then you have a problem. And of course, when inflation reduces the ability to save, because a lot of people don't want to save in Naira. Why? Because they know that the Naira in your pocket today is going to be of much less value than tomorrow. So what they do is they move a lot of money out. So I think Naira stabilized. Let's at least know what our currency is. The Rwandan currency and Naira are almost the same level, but it's stable. And so people know what they're working with. And I think if people know what they're working with in terms of currency, it helps businessmen and even helps government in terms of the policy. But also I think also that we need to begin to ask ourselves the questions, what exactly is our economic goal? Is our economic goal to become self-sufficient so that we don't import at all? Is our economic goal to continue to rely on petroleum? They will say yes, that's the goal, not to rely on petroleum. But it has to also be demonstrated in the actions of the government. You understand? What is happening, for instance, to the minerals? America is going around the world trying to sign deals with countries for rare minerals. And Nigeria has rare minerals. Why are they not signing deals with us? Is it because it's another form of neocolonialism? We must ask this question. And if they are not, can't we in ourselves leverage? Because a lot of private individuals are leveraging on that and it's not feeding into the economy. So I think diversification of the economy, I think getting people gainfully employed, putting the right peg in the right hole, if we may use that, may also help You understand? And maybe the government also needs to be proactive in the people that they place in ministerial positions, you know, from that point of view.
Well, we have tried as much as possible to work out some policies to take us out of the doldrums of economic woes. There's been the structural adjustment program, there's been poverty alleviation program, social intervention policies and all that. However, none seem to be working up till date. We've had Vision 2020, there was Vision 2010, Vision 2020, now Vision 2030. There are so many visions, but we seem not to be seeing. What should the government do? Not we now.
Yes.
It's now a leadership problem.
Oh, it is.
So what should the government be thinking of now? And what do you project would be the case in the nearest future? Considering the fact that there's the impact of fuel subsidy removal and the exchange rate fluctuations.
No, I think the first thing also, which is fundamental, is the recurrent expenditure. We're spending much more than we earn. The current expenditure has ballooned, and no government has taken the bull by the horn. And that means that you have to address it from the National Assembly. But the argument of National Assembly is that whatever they spend is still a drop in the ocean. It therefore means that all arms of government has to begin to look at the critical things that they spend money on. I think that's the first thing that will address many of the issues that we face. Because without that, without cutting your coat according to your size, spending ahead of what you earn, having a deficit that's unsustainable, it's going to be a drag on the economy. You know, and of course, borrowing also, you understand, also replaces the debt, replaces the gap. If you spend according to what you earn, then there will be less borrowing. And if there's less borrowing, you know, maybe there will be more money for infrastructure, more money to develop the economy, more money in the hands of people. Let me tell you one thing. The difference between, for instance, the Rwanda economy and the Nigerian economy is that the Naira, first and foremost, the similarity is that the rates are the same. But a driver in Rwanda, for instance, earns about 270,000. Equivalent.
Equivalent, that's
equivalent.
Naira.
A driver.
A driver.
A driver.
Okay.
You understand? And of course, the cleaner will earn about 130. Equivalent. You understand? Can you imagine that happening in Nigeria? If it happened in Nigeria, there would be less woe, less cry, less suffering, less frustration. You understand? And they're able to do that. Let me also tell you how they're able to do it. You know, I know, for instance, people of my caliber pay about almost 1 million a month in taxes. So, of course, that money is spread around. You understand? So, which means that the more you earn, the more you pay. You understand? You still have enough to keep body and soul together. But at least that money is deployed into the economy. So our tax system has to be looked at again to see that people pay tax. So we don't just rely on minerals and petroleum, but also when people pay taxes, then people will shout when you mismanage their money. Well, if it comes from the ground, they'll keep quiet. They'll say, oh, well, it all belongs to us.
Yeah, but when you see this issue of taxation, yeah, you just said something. Yeah, in Rwanda, people pay taxes and it is spread accordingly.
Yes, yes.
However, in Nigeria, what does government do with our taxes? Do we see them? Are they visible? Are they tangible?
I think the main problem with our taxes here, first and foremost, is that it's minuscule. It's very tiny compared to the total. You know,
is it really tiny?
Well,
maybe 20%,
maybe about 20% or thereabouts.
There are many taxes we pay.
Yeah,
you know, there are multiple taxation in the economy.
Yeah, but those monies you're talking about, where do they go to? Are you sure?
That's the question.
Are you certain that they actually go into the national coffers
or
the state coffers, as it is?
That is the question.
I know, for instance, on the road, and the governor may not like it. I know on the road, for instance, people collect taxes, you know, from the transporters and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure that money, I'm not sure the amount of money actually goes into the government's coffers. I rather think, you understand, some of those monies, you know, so not just that, but across goes into the private pocket. So I think first and foremost, whatever taxes are in place, there has to be compliance. Compliance is key. When we get compliance, then we begin to ask questions. Okay, the money you collect, what are you doing with it? You know, but if people are taxed and it goes into government covers, and people see what government is doing with their taxes in their various locality, then people are bound to pay more taxes. But if people see that nothing is happening as a result of their taxes, they will evade taxes. There are two words: there's tax evasion, and the other one, I should know it because I teach tax. Well, there are two aspects. They will legally evade. They will legally stop paying, and they will legally stop paying. You know, for now. So we need to encourage a place, an environment that the tax that they get, even if it's 10 naira, you know, actually does some good. In fact, if I was the government, I would say we collect 20,000 tax from you. it costs this amount to do this. Because of your taxes, we're able to build new roads. Because of your taxes, there are now books in schools. Because of your taxes, this hospital is now working. And try in a sort of way also to localize it. So if the people in Oluyole pay some taxes, if you can localize it to a certain extent, you understand, then people will pay. You understand? If you're in an estate, you understand, and you're paying your dues in the estate, and nothing works, no security, no water, the roads are decrepit, people will not pay. But the moment you begin to do those things, people say, well, let us pay it, because that will guarantee an ordered society. You can now extrapolate that, or rather, you can now expand it to a larger platform, and then you see that people respond.
Or maybe the people don't have trust with government of the day in Nigeria, and then not even the government of the day, even government ab initio, and maybe it's a trust issue and then integrity issue from government.
Yes, there's trust issue, there's integrity issue, because as far as government is concerned, the issue of taxes is surplus to requirement, not surplus, it's not the main thing. When government cannot survive except taxes are paid, you know, then government will do everything possible to make people pay taxes, and they will do things to encourage people. But when government has an additional source, which is like subventions that come from the federal purse, overwhelming, you understand, because there are only about 7 states that it is only through their taxes that the government can survive. There are only 7 states that can be self-sufficient. A lot of them rely on money that comes from the central, and most of it actually comes, as you and I know, from petroleum.
All right, let's get back to that question there, that if we look at the impact of fuel subsidy removal and the exchange rate fluctuations, will the economy of the Nigerian state survive the boom in the next 2-3 years?
Now, I hope it will, because you see that there's some method to the madness of the removal of subsidy. Many of us said if you remove subsidy, you have to have a sustaining palliative. Not the kind of palliative that you get tomorrow and you forget about that. There had to be. I think the reality of it is that petroleum was too low in Nigeria, you understand? Because, for instance, I know, for instance, in countries like Rwanda, so it's 1,006. You understand? Air is still about 900. So it was too low. But the problem was that you also had, at the same time, to have addressed the wage issue. What didn't happen was that they just addressed it, the cost of petrol, removal of subsidy, but they never addressed the wage issue immediately. And when they addressed it, it was too little and it was too late. I think that if over the period of time they're able to address the wage issue, the economy will grow, because buying power allows the economy to grow. If you have the capacity to buy, it expands the economy. And if you have the capacity to buy, you understand, of course, the government gets richer because of also through things like VAT and so on, they're able to tax, you know. So I think in the next 2 years, I think things might improve. Whether they will improve enough for this government, you understand, to be able to claim any advantage is another matter. But they should improve. Why? Because we are rock bottom. When you're rock bottom, there's nowhere else to go.
Wow, like a giant on a precipice.
Yes, yes.
So on the precipice,
yes.
Is there a saving hand on the precipice?
Is there a saving hand? I hope there is. You understand? When I look at the configuration of this government, sometimes I have serious doubts.
Okay.
You know, sometimes.
Well, we just have hope that things will get better.
Yes.
Let's look at, you talked about diversification of the Nigerian economy. Nigeria has tried as much as possible to diversify into agriculture, into solid minerals, and even into tech, as it were. However, oil seemed to be the bride. Every other form of diversification seemed to be the concubine. So what do we do? When do we start seeing those concubines as the bride, where we could have a polygamous marriage of some sort for the economy of Nigeria to thrive?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I want to ask you, do you know of a place called State House Marina?
Yeah.
Which was built in 1890 something.
I heard of that.
Have you been in it before?
No, I've not been in there.
And there are a lot of people who would kill, monetarily I mean, to be able to go and visit as a tourist from abroad. People abroad, when they travel, what do they go and look at? They look at historic buildings. They look at waterfalls, Niagara Falls, Victoria Falls. You know, they go to the lake, they go to the ocean. That's what they do when they go on holidays. Nigeria is blessed in abundance with many of these things. So tourism, of course, must be a vital part of our economy. If you go across a larger, this new coastal road that is going through, you see pristine beaches, unspoiled, unadulterated. And all those sort of things, if they're exposed, you understand, to the international community, Nigeria will get a lot in terms of tourism. So I think tourism has to be expanded. But for you to expand tourism, then security has to be taken care of.
Yeah.
I dare say security is affecting the diversification. Because if you farm and you spend so much money invested in a farm, and the next morning, you understand, it is raided by animals, herds, and so on and so forth, then what is the point? So I think, of course, agriculture is somewhere we can diversify and we can grow, and we can also export from the economy, as it were. Do you know that in parts of Benue, in other parts, the reason why Gari is very expensive, it's not just because of the economic factors we mentioned.
The invasion of herdsmen.
Not just the invasion of herdsmen. A lot of people, you understand, it's exported. The Chinese love it.
Oh.
They're not interested in the Gari.
Interesting.
They're interested in the bark. The bark is used to create, wood.
Flying wood.
Yes.
Flying wood.
So they buy it in tons, you understand, therefore depriving the local market, you understand, and they get good money for it. So, of course, the farmers will sell it in bulk to them. So that's part of the problem. I'm not saying it's the whole problem. They're just problems, layers of problems everywhere. And I think what we need in government is for somebody, a tourism minister or minister of the economy, working together and say, well, these are the problems we have over the sector, and that's what we'll seek to address it. Nigeria is a large economy, and therefore you have to have an integrated approach towards solving the problem. So tourism, agriculture, security, then the tech you're talking about. We create hubs and centers where people will come because of maybe low cost of labor, you understand, and bring the production here to Nigeria, you understand. But again, we have to have safe environments for people to come and be able to do their business.
Well, you talked about one major factor, which is security.
Yes.
But there's one other major factor we've not talked about, and that's power.
Oh, yeah, that's power. Yes, of course. One of the things I experienced when I went to Rwanda, they don't take power. And if they do,
in Rwanda,
yeah, they don't. And if they do, 5 minutes, it's gone. It's sorted. They don't take power. And of course, it allows the economy to thrive.
Yeah.
And we need to get to a stage here where power is become the order of the day. When I was growing up, if they ever took power, there was a scream around because that was exceptional. It was an aberration, but it's become normal. But the constitution has been changed, which means that states can generate power now, but it's high investment. Even universities can generate power up to a certain extent. So what I imagine over the next 2 years, people taking advantage of that so that states can have their own power grid rather than having one national grid, and then we can have power being diffused all over. So I think, yes, power needs to be resolved, and people need to be encouraged, even give people tax breaks and say, well, if you can get solar, you understand, we'll give you a tax break, so that even people can contribute to the local grid themselves, from that point of view. They should tell universities, particularly the federal universities, you get solar in place, and then you will get some incentive, you understand, for getting solar, and it will reduce their bill, because the bill that UCH pays, that UI pays, and many institutions on electricity.
Even the bill we pay here.
Yeah, the bill we pay, it's just not sustainable for a lot of them to be able to make money and to be able to thrive and to conduct research.
We'll go on this break. We'll be back in a bit. It's still the agenda. Professor Oluojedokun is still here in the studio. He's the Vice Chancellor of the Protestant University, Rwanda. Stick around. Don't go away. All right, welcome back from that break. It's still the agenda on Dominion Broadcast Group. We've been looking at the state of the nation. And doing that with me is Professor Olu Ojedokun. He's a professor of law. I'll be asking him one legal question very soon, especially when it comes to defection of elected governors from one political party to the other. But before we get there, while we're discussing, you talked about security as a major factor for diversification. So, security, national stability. Well, there's been this rising insecurity, especially when it comes to terrorism, banditry, kidnappings. There's even a new, relatively new terror group now, that's Mahmoud, that's been terrorizing the North Central, especially Kwara, Niger State, and the likes. And then you want to ask again, is it that all the money is being spent on security, on defense, it's not being justified? Is there a compromise one way or the other within the corridors of the defense ministry? What is really happening with our insecurity? When especially if terrorists attack people, you don't get to see security agents go to salvage the issue. But when you speak on social media, they're very quick to picking you up. Well, we got some feeds from the NAS president who was battered. However, we're still yet to get the true position of things. He has spoken, but many accusations and all sort of that. But we're not going there at the moment until we get the full details. However, insecurity, banditry, terrorism, herdsmen attack is rising every day. Are we going to wriggle out of this? Or is it that the leadership has no form of solution to all these problems?
No, I think that fundamentally the security architecture is wrong. We've said it again and again. The government has made moves to sort it out, but they just haven't beaten the bullet completely. What do we mean by the security architecture? The police have a responsibility. They have constabulary duties. How many are they? Maybe 350,000, maybe, you understand? 400,000. Some of them are still doing handbagging duty. So we have limited policing. That's number one.
I like the word handbagging duties.
Yes.
Okay.
So limited policing. And of course, when you have limited policing, then the police are stretched and their function, you understand, is limited. That's part of the issue. And so what people have been calling for, if you are going to have a security architecture that works, internal policing, let's not even talk about the military first, then you have to have states and regions having responsibility for their own security. And I think that's been established, that the government wants to move ahead, but they are still not, they're acting too slow. People would agree that Amotekun, to a very great extent, without weaponry, you understand, has been able to use intelligence, and presence of numbers, you understand, to limit, not to solve, but to limit some of the problems of insecurity in the areas in which they operate. And so you have to ask the question that if we had those local policing, not federal policing, which is directed, operated, and controlled from Abuja, but policing that is sensitive to the cultural values, that understands the terrain of where they're operating, have intelligence, native and actual intelligence, then of course we have more effective policing, in those areas. But there also the other aspect is that the military has got involved and there's a lot of money being spent. The military, by their very nature, you understand, they go for counterinsurgency, they go for, they only have one solution, which is force, because that's the way they are trained, But the other aspect of it is the porous nature of our borders. Because people claim that many of these people that come for kidnapping exploits and all kinds of activities, that many of them actually speak languages unknown to Nigerians, or in other words, foreign languages. So it means that our borders are not sealed. Even when we solve one security problem in the north, we still have many of them coming in. The other aspect is that it's, of course, linked to the economy. We know that in Zamfara State, at a point in time, the reason why there was so much insurgency, you understand, was to do with gold, was to do with rare minerals from that point of view. So therefore, government in itself has to find a way to get a grip. And the grip has to be the structural reforms that are needed, for the policing, and then the military itself. And then also finding a way that the money, for instance, I know, for instance, and I'm not military boys, I'm not going against you, But I know that a lot of money has been spent recently in Agodi on a nice, what's it called? What do they call those things? Mess. The officers of mess. You understand? We can see it. Now let us see money being spent on weaponry. Let us see, you understand,
money being spent on welfare of these officers.
Precisely. That's what I'm saying.
Because if you don't take care of them, you say the hungry man is an angry man.
Yes,
and you see many of them buy their boots themselves. Absolutely. They buy their uniforms themselves. But if these things are provided for, well, it could ease.
But let me even tell you a story. I have a boy, you understand, I'm not going to go in details. Okay. He was trained, you understand, in one of these paramilitary organizations. I'm not going to say the specific. Okay. But for 6 months, they were not paid. Wow. He's now working, you understand, it's an officer level. The 6 months have still not been paid. Where's that money? Are you expecting to be motivated? This so-called paramilitary went on military, not military duties, on election duties in one of the states. Those states to be specific, you understand. Up till now, you remember when the Edo State elections were held? They haven't been paid. They haven't been paid those allowances. They slept on floors. They slept in classrooms. Mosquitoes had a feast upon them. You understand? And they've not been paid. And you expect those ones to be highly motivated to guarantee the security of the citizenry.
Well, with due respect, maybe they were just going through some internship there.
Internship for 6 months. Well, if you put it that way.
well, with due respect, it's that's on a lighter note. Yes, however, it's worrisome. And,
it is worrisome.
And he who wields the gun has to be taken care of.
Absolutely.
If not, the city might just be in chaos.
Absolutely.
All right. Still talking about, you talked about community policing and regional policing.
Yes.
But there's been this clamor, calls for restructuring and true federalism. Even the tension has been on regionally. And then some people have said, why not collapse the 36-state structure and have only 6 states, or 6 regions as it were, and have only 6 governors? And then the states you have today could be provinces. That is just going back to the 1963 Constitution, dust it up and have some tweaking on it and see how we could get back to that regional system of government. Instead of governors going back to Abuja every month to go feed from a feeding bottle in Abuja. Well, do you see that as a step to the solution of this regional bigotry?
Well, there are 2 ways that this can be done. It's a step in the right direction. You can either go for wholesale constitutional amendment, or you can allow it to evolve. The creation of Amatekun was an evolution. You understand? Moving in a direction which no one can stop now. You understand? But some people may argue that it will take too long. It is quite clear that the heydays of the Nigerian Federation were when we had the Western region, the Eastern region, and the Northern region. And every region was in fierce competition with each other, constructive competition. You know, where the West, you had Cocoa House, you had Liberty Stadium, you had NTA, not NTA then, WNBS, NTV, and so on and so forth. And people were racing. The East was racing against the West, and North hadn't caught up, but they too had started. So yes, I think the Constitution needs to be looked at. And if not, let us start cooperation among states in a particular area. Cooperation in terms of transport, cooperation in terms of security. You don't even need a constitutional amendment for that. Cooperation in terms of power, you know. Cooperation in terms of many of those things. If they come together, then a natural evolution will be that the regions will become fait accompli. But I fear that the ego of many of these chief executives would prefer to call themselves, you know, we have governors of the state. And the Constitution says governor of the state, but they prefer to add the executive governor. Some because of insecurity of themselves. You know, and I ask, do we say executive president? No, we don't. They are governors of the state. We have the governor of Osun State, we have the governor of Oyo State. That is what it is. And by reason of that, they are the chief executive. You don't need the superfluity of adding that. So I think if they will concentrate more on initiatives working together, road network, train network, you understand? Even economic initiatives. There's no reason why a bunch of governors cannot go to the West and say, oh, we have investment opportunities. Let's work together. So I think that will come naturally. It can't come naturally, you understand? But there's some people who don't want to wait for that. After all, we are 2 states of the same origin, ethnic origin. They had a university, you understand? And they almost came to blows. In fact, they came to blows, not physical blows. And they just couldn't run the institution, you know. So we had more mature politicians where they would come together and say, okay, we'll run this institution together, we'll make our contributions together. If that happens, the society will benefit more.
All right, moving away from regional tensions, well, we've talked about community policing. Let's even now go to governance and political leadership of the nation so far. How do you assess the current administration's policies and promises?
On governance?
Yes.
Well, I think they promised so much, but they've under-delivered at the moment. They promised security, we don't have security. They promised economic, revitalization, we don't have it. They promised a robust foreign policy, and we still don't have it. So there are many areas, where the government hasn't lived up to. But people will say it's 2 years. And you may argue that 2 years is not enough, you understand? But if in 2 years you cannot do what you promised, then the next few years will be based on political campaigning and such like. So I think when you look at the government, I would not give them a pass mark, but I would not write them off. I think some of the things, there's a method to some of their inconsistencies. There's a method to some of the madness, and we may yet come out of the wood. And I want to give them that benefit of the doubt.
And if it doesn't happen?
Well, if it doesn't happen, where the elections are coming, and then people will have make their choice. And that's why we need robust election process.
The same people who might be hungry at that time, and then some crumbs will be thrown at them, and then they follow the bandwagon again, and we go for another 4 years after eating crumbs.
Yes, that's a risk of the so-called civil rule that we operate, you understand? But I think that's why we must find ways to pressure our House representatives to have robust electoral rules so that the right people with the right manifestos and the right insights are the ones that get elected, rather than people manipulating the system or using money to buy you for a few days or a few hours.
Corruption and accountability in this present administration is something we're talking about, especially in public offices. Now, is corruption reducing, or is it just is the status quo there, or is increasing by the day?
I don't think it's reducing.
Okay.
Nor do I think it's increasing, but it's there
Okay.
at unsustainable levels.
Okay.
There is nothing that the EFCC is doing that has addressed it fundamentally. And as far as you see politicians getting away with it, the people at the bottom will continue to dwell, will continue to swim, and will continue to engage in corruption. So I think the government is trying its best in some respect, or trying a bit, not its best necessarily, but they haven't got it yet. They haven't got it. The EFCC, in my mind, does not seem to be fully independent, and they seem to be concentrating on the Yahoo boys rather than on the big politicians.
Okay. Still on the agenda, let's look at this, and this is where we'll start looking at some legal terminologies. The electoral reforms, yes, and the 2023 elections. Well, have we learned lessons from the 2023 elections? Are we looking at some mistakes going into the 2027 elections? That is one on one side. And then on the other side, the gale of defections so far has had governors who are elected under a particular political party, which is like the vehicle to get into where they are, and now defecting to another political party. Is that not a rape of the franchise of the electorates?
Of course it's a rape, and of course it's disloyalty, and of course you are breaking a contract if you get elected on a platform and you decide to move to another. But having said that, what's the difference between the two platforms? They're virtually the same. So you may argue that the problem is not just about the politicians, but about the lack of distinction that these political parties are when you look at the respective platforms they are. There's hardly any difference between them. So that's part of the issue. But also part of the issue is that the Electoral Commission, I hope it's not true, are beginning to say they would not exclusively use the PVCs. Again, that's a recipe for disaster. But another problem, and I dare say coming from my constituency, the legal constituency, is that the courts, you understand, seem to have given a laxity to the electoral body. We thought that the technology was watertight, which therefore means that the National Assembly needs to go back to the drawing board and make it absolutely essential, absolutely compulsory. You understand? PVCs and all these, what do they call the other one that follows it? I can't remember the name. You know, PVCs and so on, and card reader, all the beavers, yes, become absolutely essential. If those things are absolutely essential, there will be no rigging, there will be no question of that. So I think all those things will safeguard our electoral process and will ensure that we have an electoral process that is robust and people have trust in. If we have that, then gradually maybe we can build a democracy, maybe.
Maybe. But what does the Electoral Act say about defections? Especially?
Okay, about defections.
Yeah.
Well, if you're in the National Assembly, the State House of Assembly, then of course, if there's division, then you could argue.
Division in the political party.
Political party.
Okay.
But if there is none, then you lose your seat.
We had some senators who defected, our House of Reps members who defected from the Labour Party to the All Progressives Congress. Heaven did not fall. Is it that those people who make these laws are the same people who break the laws?
But if you look at the Labour Party, who is the real leader of the Labour Party? There are divisions within the Labour Party.
Let the court decide.
Yes.
So when the court decides, then you can now defect. But if the court don't decide, how then do you defect when you've been elected under a platform, defecting to another platform?
Yeah, but people would argue that what the Constitution says is that if there's a division, you may argue that it's only the court that can declare a division. But people may say, when you see a dog, you know it's a dog. In other words, you don't need the court to say. Let the court, therefore, deny that there's a defection, that there's a division. So that will be the argument of some people.
All right. We'll be rounding off in a bit. But then let us also look at this issue of I want to go into infrastructural development, but because of our time, but let's just touch it a little bit, especially when it comes to power supply. Well, we've talked about power already, but the progress seemed to be last year. I think we had about 13 times, about 13 times
collapse.
The power grid collapsed in the country, and then this is 2025. We've not heard of. Okay, we had one. One for now, and then that should be a progress.
Well,
so far,
there will be people like me who say there's progress. Have it come back, and I spent maybe a week and a half, and there's only one prolonged power incident we had, but it's been regular. So some would say it's progress, but not near enough. Why do I say not near enough? I say not near enough because if you are going to have a capacity, industrial capacity, then there must be regularity of power to a certain extent. 24 hours, if possible. So I think they're making progress, but not near enough, and that's because the states and the other people that should be coming into the business, it's quite expensive, have not been able to make a headway. I think by the time many states and many institutions and many parastatals, you understand, are able to start generating power by themselves, maybe we'll begin to see the impact. Because for now, it is just the federal government that is providing the bulk of the generation of power. Well, some would say not federal government, but what do they call them? Say the TL transmission company and so on and so forth. But we all know that federal government subsidizes it to a very great extent. So I think the key and the game changer will be the entry of states and the entry of other parties rather than. You know, there's a man called, what's his name, Adeleke.
Yeah.
You know, he's put in a lot of money into power generation. Yeah. And I think once that comes on board fully, people around that area will see the impact, certainly.
Professor Olu Ojedokun, it's always a pleasure having you anytime, any day. And thank you for being around today. And, well, you'll be going back to Rwanda very soon. Yeah. And we want to wish you a safe trip and want to wish you well, too. I hope I come visiting Rwanda very soon. I know Rwanda is visa-free.
Of course, it's visa-free.
You just at the point of entry.
Absolutely.
You just pay some $50.
No, you pay nothing.
Oh, okay.
You pay nothing.
Nothing.
It's free.
They just stamped.
They just stamp you. Once they see you and, you know, you're not up to any shenanigans or stuff, you'll be stamped and you're in.
Wow. I only pay for my ticket.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll be coming to the Protestant University.
You'll be welcome.
Thank you so much for featuring on the agenda this morning. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us, dear viewer. Let's keep the conversation going. Do follow us on our social media platforms. And the handle is at Dominion Broadcast. And I mean Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube at Dominion Broadcast. And on the app X is at Dominion Cast, at Dominion Cast. My name is Chike Ubogu. Do have a great day and be good. Happy weekend.